We're back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sponsored Content. I am your host. Today on Spawn Storytime, episode number 12, we're going to find out who killed Al Simmons. The son of a bitch who pulled the trigger, the skeleton, the skull face that haunts Spawn's dreams and memories, the person responsible for sending Al Simmons to hell and ultimately creating the creature known as Spawn. We're going to find out who that was. Before we get into that, let's recap real quickly issue number 11. In issue number 11, Spawn wakes up from a dream he had in which he went on a journey with Cerebus the Aardvark. He wakes up, he's thrashing about, Bobby slaps the shit out of him. He introduces him to Boots, who is so named because he takes care of his boots. Spawn thinks, I'm kind of like Boots, maybe you should call me Allie, because that's all I have, and I'm trying to take care of it. But in issue 11, guest written by Frank Miller, we get a lot of action in the form of a turf war between two very 90s street gangs called the Nerds and the Creeps. Essentially, Spawn just orchestrates a big battle between the two gangs so he doesn't have to deal with it. Working smarter, not harder. He lets them duke it out until Byron remains, and then he chest bursts through Byron like the movie Alien. Pretty straightforward issue, a lot of action, but now we're going to jump right into issue number 12. Issue number 12 was released July 1st, 1993, featuring artwork depicting Spawn logo and the skull that haunts Spawn's dreams in sort of a yin and yang depiction here with a bullet hole in Spawn's head, which we know. Without further delay, let's find out who killed Al Simmons. As if we've been absent from the normal story for a bit here, we get a giant block of text that's kind of explaining the situation that Spawn finds himself in, where he's returned to Earth with his deal with the devil, that Spawn has returned to Earth for love. And it's mentioned here that ultimately the battle between good and evil, the battle between heaven and hell, the battle between the devil and God maybe, is going to be fought for the same reason humans exist and for the same reason that Al Simmons decided to come back as a Hellspawn, and that reason is love. Al Simmons traded his soul for it. Another series of text boxes explain a bit more of what we already know. That Spawn, he doesn't have a lot of his memories, that he's searching for answers, and a lot of those answers are not forthcoming. Basically, he's kind of accepting that his life is kind of screwed. He had a battle with Angela. This battle temporarily sent him to purgatory, and he had lost his powers, but then he found himself back on Earth. He's made quite a bond with the homeless population in the alleyways there in Rat City. He has a tremendous amount of power, including, capabilities like transmutation and reality shifting. But none of this is used at his discretion. So he finds himself back yet again on top of this church, atop of the cross here with a really awesome perspective, sort of looking down. And he still has a bit of human thought processes, and those are allowing him to make a personal connection. And he's kind of recollecting some details about his wedding. Basically, Spawn's remembering his wedding day, and that was probably the last time he was inside of church, because he's kind of an atheist and he's not really down with all these religious trappings. So he was in a church to marry Wanda, which was awesome because he's just so in love with Wanda. He was so happy. They danced to their song, which was Endless Love, and not dancing on the ceiling, but this moment gave him the warmest feeling of his entire life. And that's kind of what Al is thinking about in this moment, is he's trying to, figure out this connection to the church, and he's thinking, well, I had my wedding in a church, and I really love Wanda, so, maybe it has something to do with that. Next up, we meet Grandma Blake. This is Wanda's grandmother. This is actually our first appearance of Grandma Blake, which I failed to mention because I was so stoked to introduce the idea that Spawn's killer would be revealed. But this is Grandma Blake. She's a pretty hip old lady. She almost has like that Oracle vibe in a way. I don't know, she's blind. But basically she meets Al at the wedding. She's kind of pissed because Wanda is like not going to take his last name, and they're trying to be maybe more progressive. And she's kind of nagging him about this. And Al's like, I don't really give a shit, and she's like, well, what about the kids? And he like makes up some joke about how they'll just kind of mix their initials around. And anyway, Spawn realizes, at the time, the doctors had told him that he was not sterile, but now he knows that was false. So he's just kind of pissed at Terry again, his best friend, his best man. How could he marry Wanda? How could he be, sleeping with her? It says, Spawn feels like he's being cheated on, which is entirely accurate because, Terry's most likely putting it to Wanda. I mean, in all honesty here. So we find ourselves again at the CIA office of, international dickhead Jason Wynn. Jason Wynn has some of his men looking into the fact that, if you recall, I think in issue number 6 or 7. When Spawn went to collect all his arsenal to fight Overkill, he went into an army base, he collected all this stuff. So basically, that has now been found out at the CIA level. The knowledge of this hardware and its placement in the armory was limited to basically Terry Fitzgerald and Al Simmons. And with Al Simmons being deceased, the eyes are kind of pointing in Terry's direction in terms of, looking into who has stolen these weapons and, maybe what they're going to be doing with them. In learning this, Jason Wynn kind of contemplates sort of eliminating Terry as a loose end, perhaps, sort of like he maybe had directed with Al Simmons. So he's sort of contemplating, what his options are with regard to Terry. Jason Wynn reflects on Al Simmons being a major disappointment to him, and that's a shame about his death. Yeah, right. So basically, Wynn's underling here sort of feeds him information that Terry could be plotting revenge between him and Wanda, and wanting to exact revenge for Al Simmons' death because they initially thought the CIA was involved. Rightfully so. But basically, Jason's like, send some pressure after Terry, put some heat on him. We'll see kind of what happens or where he goes. Spawn decides, it's best to reach out to Grandma Blake and maybe she can offer some assistance with his issues of kind of coming to grips with his situation. So he just rolls up on her in the middle of the afternoon, like in jeans and a jacket with an Image Comics hat. And he's like, hey, Granny Blake, it's me. And she's like, are you fucking kidding me? Is this really you, Al? Imagine, like, how sort of terrifying this would be if you're blind, too. She basically thinks maybe he's like an apparition or a ghost, or like, he's here from the great beyond. Al says, I am in the afterlife. I'm sorry I didn't believe you, but like I know that it exists now. Basically, he's kind of making up, that he's there to tell her that she's got a place in heaven because, she's such a great person, and that he won't be there with her because heaven is for the great spirits of the world and those who care. And that does not describe Al Simmons in his previous human life. So he says that basically God in heaven is going to be welcoming to Granny Blake, but he doesn't really get into the fact that he's, a hellborn. Granny Blake continues to try to convince Spawn that he's really not as bad as he's making himself out to be, and that there's no way that he would be sent back here to communicate with her unless, there was, sort of a greater purpose that included him. But Spawn just doesn't really believe this. We see he, is kind of wanting to discuss Wanda and try to figure out how he can, like, sort of bring up the topic of his ex-wife while looking like a baked potato and being sort of a ghost here. So she's like, Al, of course she thinks about you. Like, are you kidding me? No one wanted you to die. And now that you're dead, that doesn't change anything. So he kind of got a little bit of closure there, I suppose, that she still loves Al, both Granny Blake and Wanda. But, she kind of reassures Al in this moment that, all is not lost and Wanda still has, affection for him. And then on our next page, we can see finally the reintroduction of our favorite newscasters. Our first newscast describes the ongoing violence in the city's back streets and whether or not that has any connection to Youngblood activity. Also, there's a lot of connections to suspected mafia members. And so, all of this activity, including Overkill being spotted. Everybody kind of knows him as a last resort from the home country. So they're kind of on edge because they think there may be sort of a war brewing in New York City between the mafia and maybe the Youngbloods and potentially just disenfranchised youth street gangs. The guy in the middle is sort of giving you the old, back in my day, it was uphill both ways or whatever. Sort of the Craig's dad, like, why do you need a gun? When I was, back in my day, all we needed was our fists. I don't understand why you kids resort to such crazy violence. Like, use your fists, live to fight another day. That's basically what he's saying. A bunch of pansy-ass heroes if you need to use guns. In the bottom, Mr. Entertainment, he's kind of talking about the possibility of, maybe a book being turned into a movie regarding the Al Simmons story and how that would be popular based on the current climate for movies. But at the very bottom, we get kind of a neat little blurb about they've received word that the agency handling Bedrock, has run into some legal issues with Hanna-Barbera. I think there's kind of a funny mention of, Hanna-Barbera a little bit later in this issue. Back at New York City's 12th precinct, we find Sam and Twitch. If you recall, the last time we sort of saw them, Sam opened the door to his office and found Billy Kincaid's fat dead ass hung up in chains and jammed with popsicle sticks and the such in his office. So needless to say, they have been placed on like probation while they sort of do an internal investigation, make sure they're not involved. Sam's pissed because he's always pissed, and usually for good reason, but Chief Banks is just all over his ass. He was before this, and now he certainly is, because maybe he thinks Sam and Twitch are involved in Billy's murder, which is not the case, but that's the situation. They're kind of sitting here without anything to do because they're on probation. Sam's always fired up, wanting to get back out on the street. Twitch is reassuring him there's no way they can be found at fault because they didn't do shit, obviously. And so he's trying to kind of cheer up Sam in a way, and Sam kind of gets all sarcastic about it. And Twitch also mentions that when all this shit blows over, they can kind of get back to checking out, the red-caped mystery man who was Spawn. They're really the only ones sort of on his trail at this moment, because Spawn's been spotted sort of here and there, but no one else is really sort of trying to follow him or find out what he's about. Next, we have Wanda and Cyan. They're kind of at the park, and they're just chilling, walking along. This is just kind of a cute family moment where Wanda and Cyan are hanging out, and Cyan's trying to learn how to talk a bit, and they run into Terry, and he's like, how was work, and yada, 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 This is just kind of a family moment. I think we see Winnie the Pooh right there. That's cool. This just kind of reintroduces the fact that these characters existed, several issues ago, and this was the situation, and it's like, boom, here's the nice, happy family again. Once Terry and Wanda and Cyan get home, there's a couple, creepy looking, scary, suited guys at their door, and Terry's like, this looks like maybe some business I need to handle. So he's like, what can I do for you? And they give him the pretty typical, beautiful family you have. It'd be a real shame if something were to happen to them. So Terry kind of gets the message here, but probably not much of one, because he's probably not sure, what's going on, and he wasn't involved in, the stealing of this weaponry. So again, we kind of see a situation where there are some people after the wrong person. And back midnight, we're in the streets here in the alleyway. And like I was saying before, the Hanna-Barbera reference, they're kind of all, the bums are drunk. They're singing along, singing the Flintstones song. And then it looks like Spawn actually is getting sauced for the first time. So he does the Wilma, and there's a tiny little note at the bottom that says Flintstones theme song is, copyright Hanna-Barbera. So there's, again, a little bit of legalese to get into there if you're so inclined. This is kind of the first moment we see Spawn take part in the drinking and shenanigans of his bum friends. So this is kind of an important moment because he's been defending the alleyway. Now he's kind of hanging out and getting real casual. He doesn't even have his mask on right now. He's doing just straight baked potato face. So as all the bums are kind of hanging out and carrying on, singing the Flintstones song, Spawn's super casual, kind of drunk, being a little overly friendly maybe, but everybody's just kind of carrying on, talking about farts, being gross, whatnot, taking a piss. This fella named Garib's kind of fooling around, and he puts Spawn's mask on, which is a terrible idea. Spawn realizes this, and he's like, no, don't do that, and the mask, of course, kind of, zaps its way onto Garib's face and creates, a seal like the Haunted Mask and Goosebumps. Probably not going to get this thing off very easily. Spawn jumps into action because Garib's being choked out by this mask, and so he can kind of get it ripped off. And Spawn's like, look, I'm sorry, I don't have control over this thing. I'm still trying to figure out how it works. Right now I can even take it off, which is nice, I guess, to get some, fresh air and stuff. But anyway, Garib's really not Two-Face. He's like, I almost died, but, it's not really as bad as being around one of those Jurassic farts of Bobby's. Spawn kind of chuckles, and he's like, look, but seriously, I don't control this shit, so you gotta, keep a safe distance. I'm not sure how it works. I don't know how any of this happens. I kind of feel like I need this outfit, and maybe just leave it alone. Don't touch shit that's not yours. And then in the last panel, we see he's a little bit sudsy. He's a little confused. Probably the onset of another one of his flashback, blackout freakouts. As Al's mind explodes, he thinks, I've been drinking too much, but that's not the case. He has a flood of flashback memories. He sees the skull face. He realizes that, this wasn't a skull face. This is makeup. He sees his coffin. He thinks that there's more to that story. He sees the American flag. He says, that's not for patriotism. That was my killer's employer. And things start to make sense. He's being drawn to this church. It's not the church. It's not his wedding. It's his name. It's his killer's name. We see this picture of the skull face. Now we know this is makeup. It's not a church that he was being drawn toward. And in this moment, Spawn realizes who the dirty motherfucker is that killed him. It is Chapel. Chapel. He is a young blood. He's from another comic series. I don't even know who this is, but we see this awesome ass shot of Chapel, Spawn screaming, "No!" And this is the killer. This is Al Simmons' killer. This is the son of a bitch that pulled the trigger. He blasted Al right in the face, sending him straight to hell. Do not pass go. You know, no money collected there. And this is our big ending. Finally, Chapel. So if you don't know who this is, you know, welcome to the club. I know a bit of who Chapel is in regard to his series with Youngblood, but aside from that, I do not. So like I was saying previously, I may decide to do a little bit of supplemental content with regard to Chapel and the fact that this is Al Simmons' killer, because that's really kind of important to the story. Although, you know, what they were doing with this sort of crossover at the time, you know, may or may not hold up, like, over several decades, but at this time, you know, this was really cool and this is what people were doing probably. So anyway, that's a wrap on episode number 12. This is the dirty bastard who killed Al Simmons in all his glory, looking pretty sweet himself. So anyway, thanks for stopping by. This has been Sponsored Content with another episode. Hope to see you again.